Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. I'm Biola Alabi.
And I'm Tundu Abiola. This morning, we will still dwell on the postponement of Nigeria's presidential election and the factors likely to define the build-up to the new date. And to throw more light on this will be Moyo Onigbanjo, a litigator whose work was recognized by the Legal Practitioners Privileges Committee under the chairmanship of the then Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Aloma Mukhtar, through the conferment of the rank of Senior Advocate of Nigeria on September 23, 2013. Wole Akande is the CEO of Slow Limited, an international trade and marketing consultancy firm. He has extensive practical experience working within the Nigerian political landscape and is a recognized socio-political commentator on American and Nigerian issues, while Dr. Austin Tam-George is an academic who served as River State Commissioner of Information and Communications under the administration of Governor Nyesom Wike. Gentlemen, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'd like to start off by first asking, what was your initial reaction to the bombshell of the postponement? If I thought it was a bombshell for you, you might want to discuss that. Did you anticipate it? And did your initial reaction change at all after the statement by the chairman of INEC, Professor Mahmood?
Well, for me, the first thing was that I was actually surprised it was going to hold. Because we've had a track record. So my greatest disappointment, though, was that they waited until 3 a.m. On that day to tell us about the postponement.
Okay, you thought we had passed the point of no return.
Absolutely.
Right.
And then, and now 3 things have happened. First and foremost, there's a possibility that my right to vote has been taken away because I flew in here for the purpose of voting. I'm not sure I can afford to stay in a hotel for another week just to wait without any certainty that we're still going to vote, because I'm not sure that the issues that led to this cancellation are going to be fixed on time. So that's that, plus the cost of having come here and the expense of it. So I was very glad about the reaction of the APC chairman. I think he spoke for the whole of Nigeria when he demanded an explanation. I'm only upset that he stopped short of demanding the resignation of the INEC chairman. As Yoruba people, we have something called itiju, which is shame. That in itself should be enough for him to have tendered his resignation and let somebody else go forth with it.
Mr. Onigbanjo?
Well, disappointed largely, not so shocked because I mean, if you've been in Nigeria over this last couple of years, you really have to hold your breath for anything to take place according to plan. So I was largely disappointed that I mean, the reasons given logistics really common. I mean, it just takes your breath away that in this century, we can't get our logistics right. So, I mean, they should have had dry runs. They should have, envisaged all kinds of scenarios, including the weather, including terrorist attack, including name whatever situation that might disrupt the election. Because in the last 2 election cycles, we've had postponements. So this should have featured on the agenda that, look, what do we do to prevent a repeat of these elections being postponed? Apparently, they didn't do that because, well, if you say weather, I'm even surprised at that explanation because I don't know, but I haven't seen that bad weather anywhere, and I fly regularly, and I haven't had a flight canceled even during the peak of the Harmattan. So I was really surprised at that. Then again, if you had planned ahead, you would have said, okay, look, supposing for whatever reason we can't fly, how do we, what's the alternative? So it's largely disappointing that all these things didn't really occur and that we've, at great cost to the entire nation, we've had to postpone this. The uncertainty, the tension continues. And to cap it all, inflammatory remarks are flying left, right, and center. and which is what really we need to avoid. We need an INEC that is on top of the situation. Rather than inflaming it, they should be calming down things. They should be reassuring us that, look, guys, we're on top of this. Everything is under control. You're going to have credible, free, and fair elections. But what has happened really has cast a huge shadow on all of that. But let's be pragmatic, okay? So I think it's ultimately better to postpone those elections in spite of all our disappointments, frustrations, and what have you. Because imagine if we had gone on with the elections, part of the country voting, another part not voting. That would ultimately have shut down the elections. So, a week, let them get it right, let the elections go on in all parts of the Federation, and then the results will be declared.
Dr. Tam-George.
Yes. It's good that my colleague here has talked about costs. I've seen costs to the country in excess of 2 trillion naira because of this postponement. Not to mention the reputational cost of, not being able to organize an election, because we are the, most populous country on the continent, and whatever happens here has resonance, for what happens across the continent. But I'm not totally surprised, because this INEC under the current leadership has had an unfortunate history of inconclusive elections, of conducting inconclusive elections, and then ending up with very controversial, elections. And so, it's not totally surprising. But what I think is the reason for the disappointment is because, elections are no longer coming to us in this country as a surprise, because there's a constitutional predictability that in another 4 years, we are going to hold another election, which means that logistically, you have 4 years to prepare for these elections. To come, some few minutes to midnight to say that you are no longer ready because of some, logistical challenges, it's not very convincing. But you see, again, we need to learn from what has happened and to make our people understand that ultimately what is important perhaps is the outcome of the process. But the process itself has got to be credible, it has got to be transparent, it has got to be acceptable in the final analysis. And if you can't seem to organize elections, as at when they are due, it raises questions about what the final outcome will be. And Biola, one of the most fundamental aspects of our electoral process is that we don't tend to get the victors and those who have been defeated simply by, looking at the results that come from the polls. In the final analysis, it is always up to a gaggle of judges in the judiciary to decide who eventually wins these elections. And so the more, contentious and problematic the process is, the greater the likelihood that the outcome will be litigated in court. So it is always important not just to get the elections done, but to get them properly done so that, it reduces the chances of litigation in the final analysis. Now, we've got a very huge question mark, on the process itself. So let's see what they can do in 7 days, what they apparently couldn't do in 4 years.
I'm going to pick up on what you said earlier, Mr. Akande, which is that he should resign, that he should tender his resignation. There have been different calls for him to tender his resignation. That is the INEC chairman. And there have also been a school of thought that at this point there shouldn't be a resignation because you do need someone that understands what the problems are to shepherd this process to a conclusive end. Why do you think that he should resign? And to those people that don't agree that he should resign, I would like to understand if anyone on the panel believes that he should not resign at this point.
I started out by speaking about the consequences of me not being able to vote yesterday. So the question is, what is the consequence to the chairman? He went home last night. He slept on his bed. He didn't spend a penny. No cost to him for this failure. It's his failure, not mine. So he failed me, and there are no consequences to him. I find that unacceptable. And every Nigerian should find that unacceptable. We all had costs. Businesses were shut. Weddings were changed. all over Nigeria.
Why do you believe he hasn't resigned?
I come back to that thing that I said earlier about itiju, shame. This lack of shame in Nigeria is what is why we're where we are. Nobody has shame anymore. In the 60s, there was shame. But we see it all over. You know, nobody knows how you made your money, but they make you a chief. You know, everybody says sa to you because you have something. So this shame is gone. And the other part about it that we need to investigate as a country is a determinant about who we put where. What qualifications does he? I Googled him. And he was chairman of TED Fund before, or executive secretary of TED Fund for a number of years. And that's his claim to fame. And okay, yeah, you could say he's managed an institution before. But elections are about logistics. What are skill sets? Mm-hmm. Should we not have particular skill sets for people to manage huge enterprises like this that has a cost to the nation? And my colleague here talked about the cost to the nation, the embarrassment of it. I've been getting calls from all over the world saying, guys, what's going on? And nobody is shamed? And he thinks, okay, it's okay for him to carry on? No. We must at some point say enough. And he could say, look, I resign at the end of this. He could have said that. I would do these elections, but because of the shame, I've tendered my resignation now pending the end of this. Something must happen to send a signal to all Nigerians that this kind of behavior should not be acceptable.
In 2009, in Italy, 6 scientists were unable to predict the full impact of an earthquake that was coming. At the end of the earthquake, I think 93 people were killed, millions of dollars of damages were recorded. And you know what the government did? They arrested them, sent them through the court process, and they were jailed. See, I understand, this synonymic connection between holding public office and being accountable. I don't fully agree that he would resign because of a sense of shame. Nigeria lost our collective sense of shame for a long time. So people are no longer able to accept responsibility because they don't see a connection between failure.
But he did accept responsibility. In his statement yesterday, he said, I take responsibility as a chairman
but
of INEC.
the last stop,
yes, he didn't go a step further.
Yes, you take, I would think, going forward, that anytime we have appointments like this made, we need to do a very proper background checks, and maybe we should have alternative nominees, so that should, the incumbent, prove to be incapable of executing the job, we ought to have alternative nominees, to quickly step in and get the job done. But now that we're already dealing with the fact of the postponement, I think what INEC should do is to take steps to reassure the country about the credibility of the process remaining intact. Because, a lot of sensitive materials already left the door. Yeah. And some of these materials may have been compromised. How do we know that the process is still something we can take seriously? How can we be sure that all of these manpower, including the NYSC group that ought to superintend this process across the country, how will they be mobilized? Because the logistical issue will remain until such a time when we receive guarantees that the process will in fact produce an outcome that we will all accept. I haven't seen those kind of guarantees yet. What I've seen, including this morning when I was going through the papers, is that some of those sensitive materials have apparently been recalled, back to the vaults of the CBN. What will they do differently in the course of the remaining 7 days? I mean, that is something we need to really. 6 days, So we need to see what the INEC chairman will come up with. I think it's a very unfortunate outcome.
Dr. Tam, I just want to get from you, are you also calling for his resignation, or do you stop short of calling for his resignation?
No. Actually, I expected that he would have resigned along with the statement itself. because this is a very, very terrible experience for we've had this process since 1999. And one would have expected that incrementally, we need to be, moving forward. But to say that, well, elections were postponed in 2011 and eventually in 2015, we shouldn't be, justifying failure by harking back to the past. So I think this is something we need to consider very seriously.
Well, I don't think he should resign. I'm not holding brief for him. I don't defend his actions. But it's too crucial. The period is too short. You have 6 days. If he resigns now, the first problem we're going to have is a squabble over who succeeds him. So if the president brings another person, all kinds of allegations are going to fly. The two major parties will be at loggerheads, and that it will be too disruptive to the process. If perhaps we had a longer time frame, and these elections were maybe 3 months away, yes. But in 6 days, if that guy goes there, then it's going to be worse. It's because if you bring in a stranger, how does he get grip of the entire process in this short time frame? And then again, the issue will be what agenda is he there to play? So, and really, if you bring somebody in now, I'm not so sure he can perform any miracles. Let this guy see it through. 6 days' time. He has an opportunity to correct his mistakes. Let him do it. Otherwise, the consequences might be... So if we bring in somebody else and he says, oh, and then we do the elections in 6 days' time, and maybe for one other reason, we can't even go ahead again. He'll say, oh, it's because of what the former guy did. So I think let's just leave them. Let the government, the federal government, and all the agencies, let them assist them with the logistics in every manner possible, and let the elections go on.
My God.
Well, I'm glad you're here as a lawyer. 2 things. First and foremost, I said he could have said, after this process, I resign. Tell us that up front so we know you're going. That's the first thing. The second thing I query is that, where did 7 days come from anyway? Was it constitutionally mandated? Why did they choose 1 week? Why not 2?
No, he said because the
reprogramming
yes,
of the
the
card
ICT
reader
team
takes 5
needs
to
5
6
to 6 days.
Right. So, but my point is, it could have been longer.
It could have been longer,
Right.
and we're going to come to that next question,
which is why I'm saying
Yeah.
I'm glad he's a lawyer, so he can tell us that the legal limits of what the Constitution says,
Sure.
because I don't profess to know. But I'm saying, even for myself, even for the political parties, how do they reload? Because it's money. There is money involved in this. And I use myself as an example.
Which the APC chairman also reeled out how their logistics and the cost to them.
Right.
No, but coming to your point about your massive inconvenience that you've incurred, most of the electorate people have traveled like you have.
Maybe not as far, but they have
traveled. So INEC is not even offering a palliative to the electorate in the form of extending the period for collection of PVCs. However, it could be argued that they've offered a palliative to the political parties by saying that campaigns are still frozen. Nobody is to campaign. So that might lessen the cost of the political parties. Would that be accurate at all? In counting the cost that you're estimating at $2 trillion, will that lower the cost for political parties since the campaigns don't have to be run for an extra week?
Well, the campaign's already ended.
Yes.
In anticipation of the election on Saturday. Now that the exercise has been shifted by 1 week, it makes no difference to the parties whether they campaign or not. In any case, the budgets have run out, so I don't think they will consider going into the campaign process afresh.
No, they can't, because INEC has said that they can't.
Yeah, that's fine. But you see, I think in the final analysis, we need to recognize that what has happened, has happened. We have 6 days now, effectively. If they want to recalibrate the card readers and other technological tools that will be needed in the process. Let them get it right. Because now, at this point in time, what we're interested in is let there be an enhanced credibility in terms of the process. Let there be an enhanced acceptability in terms of the outcome. I think that will be more than sufficient compensation. The biggest problem we've had, as I said before, with the electoral process is that it invariably produces, very contentious outcomes. If this is going to enhance the transparency, the acceptability, and the credibility of the process, then that is perhaps something we can deal with. But as far as the cost is concerned, there will be a cost, not just now, but even by next weekend, because the entire system is going to be frozen afresh, and then people will have to travel again, and then people will have to put their businesses on hold. So it wasn't just the past weekend. Even next weekend is going to be a complete shutdown of the system. And I think that this serves a very important lesson for managers across the board. They should know that whatever happens, whatever it is that they do, the decisions that they make have very powerful resonance across all spheres of our national life. And I think they should take this job a bit more seriously. Some of the international observers that came into the country probably didn't bargain for staying for another 1 week. People flew in from all parts of the world, from Europe, from the African Union, and so they will have to either, go back or,
extend their stay,
reschedule their stay. So all these things have very massive cost implications for everyone across the board. But let us see what the outcome eventually will be. If it turns out to be a cleaner election, a more acceptable process, a more credible outcome, I think that would be a good compensation at this point.
If I can add to that, and this is where I worry. Earlier on, I said I was not sure if I was going to come back to Lagos to vote because of the point you just made. The INEC chairman says it's going to take 4 to 5 days to reprogram.
He actually said 5 to 6.
5 to 6, yeah.
5 to 6 days to reprogram the card readers. And now he wants to hold the election on the 7th day. Where's the time? I mean, we're all in business. You have to give room. Is there enough room?
Maybe it's calculated in that, which nobody asked if it was actually calculated in that time. I guess that leads to, I would like you to answer, though, from a legal perspective, if there was any reason why the 7 days was the bullseye for
Well,
that.
I believe the Electoral Act stipulates a time frame for holding the elections in order to give room for litigation that will normally fall out of the elections. And a slight digress to what my brother said, that it's not just the outcome that produces litigation. The politicians that we have are so litigious, because you would even see, even in their own internal party elections, there is strife, there is rancor, and they're in court, even over. So that's why, for example, before elections were held, APC had issues in Rivers, in Zamfara, SDP has issues with who their presidential candidate is. So it's the nature of our politicians to go to court. Most of them are not good losers. So anytime they lose, they ascribe it to either INEC or rigging or what have you. It was only President Jonathan who did something, who swam in a different direction when he conceded. I mean, Nigerian politicians hardly concede. So, but going back to the issue, so the elections must be held within a certain time frame to give room for all the litigation, especially for the presidents, to be exhausted before 29th of May, which is the handover date.
One of the things that all three of you have raised has been about this process and going forward with this process, and if this postponement is going to lead to a cleaner, better process. You've talked about the cost to you and the inconvenience to you. Do you think that when we talk about voters' confidence, and based on the INEC chairman's speech yesterday, did you think that speech did anything to boost voters' confidence in the process and also in that office?
I don't think his speech had any effect because people are disillusioned, people are very suspicious, people are also very partisan. So you have a lot of people who already think that, oh, this is set up to ensure the elections are rigged. So if you go online and you see the comments, very acidic, very vitriolic, and what have you. So to those people, what he's saying is just water off their back because they're already suspicious. But I think what everybody should just do is that we all need to reload and go back and be prepared to vote. So those who have traveled at great cost, it's unfortunate. The people who can stay back, because this is very crucial to the nation. We need to decide who governs us for the next 4 years. And I think the cost and going back to vote again are part of the sacrifices we all have to make to ensure that we have a nation that we can live and work in, where our children can grow up in. Otherwise, what do we have? What are the alternatives? So I think the statement is neither here. When I even read it, it was too played. It was too, it was just, it didn't really empathize.
Not
It was
at all.
it was a
Not at all.
technocrat.
Exactly,
Like
exactly.
you said, he didn't offer an apology.
Yes.
He's obviously a man who is quite reticent. He's not prone to the theatrics of like a Maurice Iwu, who said he would die to deliver free and fair election. He's not a dramatic person, but he could have been more
He could have been more
empathetic.
empathetic.
But I came in here selfish. I was talking about me. And I want to talk about the other side. When I came into Lagos, I saw these seemingly well-to-do or decent women with sleeping on bags all across around where I was going to vote. And I started asking, who are these people? And I found out that they were INEC officials. So let's think about that for a minute. So they came to do a job. No accommodation was provided for them.
Nothing.
So maybe they just thought, okay, I'm just going to do this overnight and go back. Now, what's happened to those people? Okay? Are they going to wait here for 1 week? I don't know where they came from. I don't know where they're going back to. But obviously they had a bag and they were sleeping on it out in public. So what's going to happen to those people? Who's paying for them? Do they have enough time to find themselves? Okay? That's number one. Number two, is there a budget provision for this? Because where's the money coming from? Who's paying that cost? Is there an emergency budget that's going to, there's so many questions going on that we need more time to investigate. So I'm not even sure that you could go to some polling booths that these officials who will be badly treated, they might not show up. I mean, we're Nigerians, we know. They paid them already, or at least I presume they paid them. So they're taking that money and saying, I'm not coming back until you send me money again.
I was coming to the treatment of the ad hoc staff. We all saw these awful pictures. And like you were saying, people sleeping on the floor, youth corpers deployed to God knows where, sleeping outside on the ground.
Right.
It's disgraceful. So that's another logistical failure of INEC that needs to be accounted for.
And we don't know what's going to happen. Are they waiting around? He didn't mention anything about that. He didn't explain anything to me. So you're now telling me that when I go back, I would trust everything's done and I come back. I'm not sure that I'm prepared to take that chance. And I'm upset that I'm not going to be able to cast my vote.
So you're not going to wait around?
I can't afford to wait around. I'm being honest.
Which is fair enough. It's important to know.
Right.
I mean, yes.
Right. I can't afford to wait around. And wait around for what? I'm not retired. I got a job. I mean, I got things I'm doing. So you're saying I should wait around for 1 week? Who does that? And time has value.
It does.
And we must value time.
The last election, 2015, the statistics show that 33% of Nigerians who are eligible to vote, i.e. Nigerians above the age of 18, voted in those elections. 33%. So are we looking at a decline at this point? That means it's barely going to be a quorum.
If people have to move from one place to the other, we saw images of people in Kano, for instance, who were leaving the state because first they wanted to go home to vote, and then they also anticipated that there might be violence either during the election or immediately after the election, and they wanted to go home to vote. So there are a host of things, we need to consider. The question of home, the notion of home in this country is very problematic. Some people could stay in Lagos for 20 years, and that sense that they are from Lagos still hasn't settled in. So this whole notion of indigenship is something that also affects electoral behavior. People could live in Borno for so many years, but on the day of the election, they think they should go to Umuahia to cast their vote. And so you find that the mobility that happens around periods of election isn't just mobility for people buying food or selling stuff. The people actually wanting to, exercise that sense of, identity. We need to make sure that we go home to vote. How can we rethink this notion of indigenship? How can we make sure that even if we live in Bauchi or we live in Calabar, we do business in Rivers, we ought to be able to participate in the electoral process there.
That's a great point.
Yes, and allow our votes to count.
Even apart from voting, even participating, even contesting where you live. You don't need to be from Bauchi to run for elections in Bauchi, for example.
Yes, it's not often that you hear that someone is living North Dakota to go to California to vote. It's not often that you hear that someone is leaving Johannesburg to go to Cape Town to vote. So why should we, have millions of people, moving internally within their own country simply because...
Let me say one thing. I think that is very sad because, to my mind, I really wonder if I live and work in Lagos, then why would I go and register, for example, in Akure? I don't really get that, for one. And I think the issue of indigenship, which you raised, the antidote is in all these forms we fill, scrap the issue of state of origin.
Yes, and local government of origin.
Yes,
Irrelevant.
Scrap it completely. Just ask for their residence. And that's it. Because why are you asking me for what state?
It's actually unconstitutional. Nigerians have the right to settle anywhere.
Yeah, why are you asking me for state of origin and all these things that will make you discriminate against me?
Yes.
I think we should just scrap that. Just ask for the person's residence. Period.
But there's also the security angle, which we cannot ignore. The reason why people do migrate to vote is that there's safety in numbers. They feel safer where there are more of them. Yes, in case violence kicks off, the violence among us tend to attack those that they feel are isolated. If you're a Christian in a predominantly Muslim area at that time, you're vulnerable. Or if you're a Southerner in a predominantly northern area, you're vulnerable. So people tend to try and protect themselves, unfortunately.
But that points to the identitarian nature of our politics itself.
Yes.
Because, why should you feel safer among a certain people and not among others?
Why indeed?
So this speaks to the character of our politics. Politics is divisive, driven by ethnic sentiments rather than the issues. So I would have thought that, our political class, and, that's a very problematic class, as you know, our political class ought to know that there is something wrong with whipping up ethnic and identitarian sentiments simply because they want to divide the people in order that they could get a slice of the votes. And then we've seen a great deal of division happen in certain states.
Let's just be specific. Let's talk about Kaduna.
Yes.
Kaduna continues to be a place where a lot of this type of rhetoric is being generated on a daily basis. Earlier this morning, I was reading that the Christian Association has now debunked the fact that Governor El Rufai said 66 people were killed.
Actually, he didn't say 66 people were killed. He says Fulani. He said
he said specifically.
He said Fulanis were killed. Yes. Now, when you give...
And you specifically even mentioned the local government in which it happened. It was so specific and divisive.
So when you mention the ethnic identity of victims of violence, what you're doing is to weaponize ethnicity and mobilize it, as a political tool. We've seen a great deal of divisive rhetoric.
But we have
coming
not had a
from-
lot of condemnation coming from different political corridors when it comes to Governor El-Rufai's statements.
Yeah, that's
and
because
comments.
his rhetoric feeds into the larger narrative of identitarian politics. That's the point I'm making. You know, if you understand that you can mobilize people sectionally in order to continue in office in perpetuity, you will do it. And that's what is happening in Kaduna State, because he talks all the time about, you know, Muslims and Christians, northern Kaduna and southern Kaduna. And, you know, if you look at the kind of divisive rhetoric, the intention is not innocent. The intention is to make sure the people remain divided so that you can continue to exploit that division in order to have political relevance. Why is this kind of violent and exclusionary rhetoric not being condemned in this country? It is because it feeds into a larger politics of identity. And I think this is something we should.
Sorry, I just want to comment. I take a totally different perspective on this. Because what we're talking about here is the whole issue of Nigeria. And it's bigger than just this. And I'm saying that let's focus first and foremost on our ability to elect people that we want, which will give us confidence in the Nigeria that we have. This refusal of us to use technology in our electoral process is a key fact. When you listen to the INEC chairman yesterday, talk about logistics. I need to print this. I need to print that. I need to do this and that. You know, you can't steal a car anymore, especially an expensive car, because anywhere in the world it is, they will find it. They can decommission it. The same thing with a mobile phone. You can wipe out a record on any mobile phone, especially if it's an Apple phone. You just call Apple, or you even send a signal yourself, and your phone is wiped. So that, and then you can also send information to your phone. A card reader is nothing but an advanced phone with a slot to swipe. That's all it is. And the fact that we now still have to print all these things to send to all whereas we can just focus on technology, ensure that people are aware. You can double, what's accreditation? Accreditation is my fingerprint. And I can double check that fingerprint. You know how? My card reader has my fingerprint on it. The minute I put it into a device and it says unlock, it can double code it and check it with a physical instrument. And yet we are refusing to do all these things. We're now still stuck in this archaic way. We are printing paper, sending ballot paper. I mean, you know, it's just madness.
Archaic is the word.
The additional cost to it. No, I know what the lawyers, what my brother, the lawyer, is going to say. There needs to be documentation.
No. That's not what I'm even going to say. See, I listened to these arguments on technology yesterday also. But unfortunately, you forget that Nigeria is not just Lagos and Abuja. So you now go to the village in Kaura Namuda. Half of the population, or 90% of the population, are not even literate. There is no internet. There is no Wi-Fi. So how do you use technology in those places? It's not going to work.
So no, I don't agree with that. Because when mobile phones came out, they told me my grandmother in the village would not be able to use a mobile phone. But guess what? She can use a mobile phone. Okay? Because someone took the time to teach her how to do it, and now she's an expert at it. She'll type whatever it is and send you that message in Yoruba. She can do that. That's number one. Number two, what's the name of the Emir of Kano now? When he was CBN governor, when he was CBN governor, he had this policy where he was going to put Wi-Fi in every single local government in Nigeria. Okay? And he was going to drive it because he thought it was very necessary. That did not happen. INEC has a budget. It has a time to plan. It can say, you know what, 4 years from now, we want to be able to do this. I'm just, you know, all I'm saying is that let's get with it. Don't let us still be stuck in, when I listen to the INEC process.
See, it's a developmental thing. We can get there, but right now, we're not there. No. Even now in Lagos, there are gaps in technology. So I can get here and I can even make a simple call on my phone, not to talk of even accessing the internet. So there are gaps. So, and if you rely on that kind of process for these elections, so imagine in many places where there is no Wi-Fi at that particular voting period, then what do you do?
When we started democracy, I was 20 years younger. So the point is that for 20 years now, we've been in this process. Has anything changed? The only additional we've had is card reader. And I'm saying that we're better than that. Countries have moved in these last 4 years.
Yeah, but it's bigger than INEC, right?
No, it is INEC. INEC can decide.
No, it's bigger than INEC because INEC cannot now build mass towers to provide internet or Wi-Fi all over the Federation for elections that take place in an election cycle of, say, 4 years. So INEC, that cost cannot go to INEC. It's for the country to put this technology in place.
It's an overall infrastructure, part of an infrastructure
in place. So if it's not there, then you can't say we should go technology. And I would also tell you that we tried to use technology in the Nigerian Bar Association, the last elections. We still had controversies. One of the candidates went to court over it. So whilst it's desirable, but at the moment, we can't do it.
Maybe what we can do is to look at what other countries are doing. In Finland, for instance, internet access is no longer a social need. It's a constitutional matter with specific amount of bandwidth allocated to each citizen. Now, the logic is that if we are going to sustain and actually improve on our democratic process, it is not enough simply for individuals to choose. They must make informed choices. And in today's world, in the internet age, you get information through access to the internet. So you see that, they give a particular bandwidth to each citizen, limited amount of bandwidth to each citizen as a matter of constitutional right. So information access ought to be elevated in this country to the status of, a constitutional right. Now, this question of, for those of us in communication studies, there's something we call technological determinism, thinking that technology solves all the issues. It doesn't, actually. While I support that we need to have increased technological penetration across the country, including rural areas, what I think is a major stumbling block is that there has to be an organic intent to make the process itself transparent. When you introduce technology to that extent, what you're demonstrating, in fact, is your commitment to transparency of the process. In this country, what is lacking, therefore, is not lack of technological penetration as such, as much as lack of commitment to the transparency of the electoral process. In 2015, we saw on live television underaged children voting in Kano. 4 years later, we haven't seen what has been done as far as underage voting is concerned. So this is not a matter of technology as such, as much as whether we have the commitment to have a transparent process. Once you introduce technology into a process, what you're doing, in other words, is to depersonalize the process by saying that, look, I'm not in this process, let the process run its normal course. To do that, you must have a rigorous commitment to transparency, credibility of the process. In this country, more than technological penetration, what we need is that commitment at policy and leadership levels that, look, we want this process to be completely transparent. And I suspect that commitment is missing, because if you go to rural areas or metropolitan Kano, young children as young as 10 queuing up on live television and voting. And then we had outrageous figures emanating from there. And then soon after the elections, the resident electoral commissioner and his entire family were burned to death in an inferno, which was never investigated. So it seems to me that the challenges that we face are both of a technological nature and of a human nature. We do not have a demonstrated commitment to make the process as transparent and acceptable as it should be.
But you have to accept the card reader has reduced fraud in the electoral process?
Yes, it has.
Thank you so very much. That was the introduction of technology.
Yes.
And it can be incremental, right? The problem is that we've not had any incremental change.
Why? Because there is no will.
And I agree with you on that, but I'm saying that we as Nigerians need to now start talking about all these issues collectively.
Absolutely.
For us to totally understand that credible elections are very important to all of us, so that I know that when I vote for Tudun actually sits and represents me in the context of things.
You know, it's good that you mentioned the card reader. If we truly want to technologize this process, why can't the card reader have the same flexibility as our ATM cards? If you open an account anymore here, you should be able, you actually can access your money anywhere in this country, in fact,
Absolutely,
anywhere in the world.
Yes.
So I thought that the system, the PVC, the card readers ought to be calibrated in such a way that people, in fact, do not have to move from place to place simply because they want to cast the vote. If you registered in Uyo, you ought to be able to cast your vote in Alimosho here in Lagos. But the system is not dynamized in that way. That is because we still have this, this bigger narrative of identity politics. People are not able to overcome that yet. We ought to be able to vote anywhere we are.
If I may
The
come in
system-
now,
Only for the system to be harmonized.
Is this one of the issues that arose when we lack the proper legislative framework in the amended Electoral Act, which President Buhari refused to give his assent to? And we are actually currently operating under INEC guidelines, which falls far short of a proper act of a National Assembly. All of these issues would have been addressed.
Well,
The question of, I think the question of card reader, and our friend here, the SAN, probably knows this better than anyone else. I think the question of the importance of the card reader in the electoral process was at some point a matter of litigation. And the question, I think, was settled when they said, well, INEC could take whatever measures to improve the transparency of its processes. But card reader or not, wasn't necessarily a matter supported by law. I don't know whether that was the final.
Yeah, the position was that the Supreme Court ruled that card reader was not part of the legislative framework for the elections. So the challenges to election petitions based on the use or lack of use of the card readers was shut down for that. But to answer your question, we have enough laws in Nigeria. So I don't think it's the legislative framework that is the hindrance to credible elections. The problem we have is one of personnel, one of the operators themselves. So in Nigeria, there are so many laws, you can count them, but people flout them with impunity because they know that there's not going to be any repercussions.
Consequences.
So I can drive against the traffic in Lagos all the way from my residence to your studio, knowing that nobody's going to apprehend me, knowing that even if I'm apprehended, it's just going to end up with maybe a backslap or chat or whatever, and then I get scot-free. So where people get away with flouting existing provisions, making new legislation is not going to also stop them from flouting it. So if you make new laws and there's no compliance, there's no enforcement, you might as well not have made them.
So do you think that the president signing or not signing doesn't make a difference?
Well, I don't think it makes a difference to these elections, really, because like I said, so the president signs the laws and says, okay, use technology, use card readers, use what have you. But it would not have stopped the elections from being postponed because it's the people who operate these laws who are the problems themselves. It's the people who try to snatch ballot boxes, who try to rig the elections. That's where you have the problem.
so let's look at it. The president said there was not enough time. That was why he rejected it.
Yes.
That if they want to do it for the,
the
next
next, yes.
one, he will sign it. So change the date, he will sign it. Well, that's a good thing. His excuse then, maybe we now see was relevant now, because INEC, with 4 years, could not even conduct an election under which they knew what the rules were. So maybe the president knew that these guys didn't have capacity anyway. So we should thank him, actually, for that, okay, for that foresight, so to speak. But, you know, really, at the end of the day, you know, we need to begin to collectively question everything about what we want as a country. Even the system itself, I mean, do we need this? I mean, before, you know, after yesterday, I went to Google other electoral commissions. I went to other report. I went to check out how India is the largest democracy in the world. 1 billion people, and yet they vote. And each vote in India counts. How does that work? What do they do? I mean, we must develop ourselves. We must be more interested in saying, you know what, there's a Nigerian way, and showcase ourselves that, you know, we've taken the American system of democracy and we've amended it to what works for us as Nigerians. I mean, we all know each other. Like he said, he was driving one way. I know the result of that. I get stopped, I settle, I move on. That's the Nigerian way. We know that. So maybe we should develop an electoral process that works for us, that we all buy into. The lack of thought into our electoral process is what annoys me and what has cost me money today. And that should stop. And I hope everybody says that, and the people listening say that forcefully, that from today onwards, there must be a cost.
When you look at the electoral process in South Africa, I lived in South Africa for a while and observed the process there. There's a sense in which you feel that they have domesticated the system in a way that works for them. In fact, throughout my stay in South Africa, electoral observers, all these fellows who came into the country to observe their process, always said they came to learn from South Africans, you know, how to get their own systems work better. So it's not a failure across the continent, in fact. The question I think we should ask in the specific example of Nigeria is whether our electoral politics actually serves us well. True. Personally, I don't think so.
True.
You can't have this large number of uneducated people and yet feel that the kind of democracy we seem to be practicing works for us. Personally, I think that we need to have a serious rethink. We need to completely rethink our political infrastructure, our systems, and ask, is it really wise to transplant the American presidential system and pretend to be practicing it? I say this with some sense of guilt because I have served in government before. I have worked very closely in government and I've seen from the front row the kind of systemic crisis that could result when people just don't take the right decisions. And I think I have a theory that the dysfunction of our system is just perfect for the kind of dysfunctional political elite that we have. While in government, I didn't see much appetite to improve the system. You will think that, you know, people keep talking about our system being a nascent democracy, our system being a fledgling democracy. They are not using those kind of vocabulary in South Africa, even if they gained proper democratic independence only in 1994. They are not using the same vocabulary in Kigali in Rwanda, even if they just emerged from a genocidal war.
So what you're saying is that
so
there's
what
a
I'm
big
suggesting,
sense of
and I've said this,
complacency in
yes,
Nigeria.
what I'm suggesting, and I've said this in different places, is that probably what we need is a complete, serious rethinking of our democratic process. I would suggest that we probably should aim for a government of national development that will be in office for 20 years. Yes. And then
That's radical.
Yes, it is. Because what we need is a complete rethinking of our process. Our people, look, we have the largest number of out-of-school children in the world, 13 million. Nowhere on earth does that happen. We have a broken infrastructure. We have the largest amount of illiterate people. You can't have this kind of electoral democracy without a sophisticated social consciousness. We don't have it. We have ousted India as the poverty capital of the world. You can't have proper informed choices made on the back of a poor population. We need a government of national development that draws from the best genius of Nigerians, both in the homeland and in the diaspora, for the next 10 or 20 years. And then we rewrite our constitution, we rethink our structure, we completely redefine our internal citizenship. And, it's not new. Look at what happens in China. And I'm not saying we should transplant exactly what is happening in China here to Nigeria. But in China, over a period of 10 years, before a new leader, I know this is a revolutionary.
You've introduced something quite dramatic.
Yes, but you see what the Chinese have done. They've taken the world by storm. They are not looking at what is happening in Western Europe. They are looking at what is organic, what serves them best. They are the industrial hub of the world. They've taken the world by storm. So why don't we look at what works? It may not be a model for those in Europe and elsewhere, but why don't we completely rethink our processes and then see whether we can find a more domesticated process that serves us better?
You know why that won't work, right? Because
I love that the lawyer says this won't work.
You know why it won't work? Because of our people. We have the most selfish set of leaders and followers, I think, anywhere in the world. So every Nigerian wants to subvert the system. Every Nigerian wants to take an advantage of the system. So the people that we elect are not true to us. They mislead us. They're selfish, they're corrupt, they're parochial, they're just name any affliction, they have it. Is the followership any better? No, we're not. Because we keep electing the same people. We know that this man, we know his reputation, we know that this guy is not going to get us to the promised land, but we return him to office. I mean, look at the candidates that are vying for election all over the country. In fact, the elites and the better educated people and the people who would even do a better job are not there. You have virtually mainly miscreants who are in the National Assembly, who are in the executive.
I take a totally different view from that, because no Nigerian is a miscreant or every Nigerian is a miscreant. I can look at it from that perspective. When I came into Lagos, I was hearing about some guy, ex-musician or current musician, running for office. And everybody in Lagos is telling me he's going to win that local government or that federal rep.
Which
seat.
Local government?
No, the federal rep.
Banky W.
Banky W, yes. I didn't know him.
Okay, fine.
I didn't know about him before.
You know what?
Can I finish?
So wait, you know what? So we'll see in a couple of days if he wins.
Yeah,
we'll see.
We will.
That's the problem, because wait, you see, the two mainstream parties, the front-running parties, have locked this down. It's between them. So if I go to a party now that is not on their platform, my chances are slim. Let's be realistic. So you have very good candidates from other, not the two mainstream parties who are running for president. You have Mogalu, Wiado Ezekwesili, and Showori and other people. But do they really stand a chance? They don't.
So you see, there's also a laziness in Nigeria. The laziness of not wanting to do any work. Politics is work. And, two things must happen in Nigeria. We must recognize that politics is a profession, a good profession. You can serve it for the rest of your life. Focus on it, work on it. It's what happens in other countries where families are political families. Everybody knows that. They go into politics. They study politics. They understand it. We don't want to do any work. So I just come. I've served in government before. Oh, I can be president. I go run for president. Where does that happen? I don't know where that happens. So you have all these guys. They have big names. They go to fringe parties and then say they are running for president and they should get a chance. None of them have gone to build from the grassroots. And the grassroots is where politics is at. I've been in politics here in Nigeria. There are people, you go to certain sections. They will tell you who the landlord in that section is, who the local kingpin is there. who has been there, who has taken care of the community, who has told them what to do, and they will say that they are going to wait for him to tell them where to vote. When I ran for election once here. I went out of Ikeja. When I was in House of Rep, when I was running, they took me to some guy. He was in SAS or whatever the police. But in that whole neighborhood of Adeniyi Jones, he was the guy in charge. And they told me that if I wanted the vote, I needed to talk to him. So again, you have to go down. All these guys high flying, they're not going to get anywhere. They either join a main party and try to fight their way through, or they start from the grassroots. We must do this hard work of politics before things can improve.
Okay,
that's my own perspective.
But beyond the mechanics of simply joining politics, getting identified with one of these political parties and eventually winning, beyond the mechanics of the process, I think we should worry more about what happens a day after the election.
You're more concerned with governance.
Yes, yes. Because for me, the mechanics of people simply getting into office doesn't mean a lot to me. I'm more interested in how the material condition of Nigerians changes as a result of the choices they have made. And the point, in fact, the reality is that these so-called choices end up not being informed choices. The people are more likely to vote for a fellow because he's from the same area, or he worships the same God, or he just came out from the same mosque. Now, when you use those kind of identitarian considerations in influencing those kind of choices, and eventually the person gets there, the next most important question is, what happens then? We don't get a sense of stewardship, for instance. A person eventually wins the election, but you don't see him or the person, connecting back to the so-called grassroots to say, look, there is no city in this country that supplies water to its residents. None.
Which is why boreholes are part of every campaign.
Yes, and you know the public health implication. You know the public health implication of having all kinds of people are dying of intestinal diseases in 2019. In Johannesburg.
I want to jump in because I just want us to shift gears a little bit. We've all talked about the cost, different elements of the cost. There are some of the headlines in today's papers. The cost have been estimated, have been sort of projecting from 10 billion naira all the way to 200 billion naira. You said $1 trillion. When you look at the productivity of Nigerians leading up to elections, yesterday we talked about the fact that most schools closed for Thursday and Friday. When we look at the overall cost of these elections, most companies have not really been fully active because everyone's waiting until after the election. Nigeria has one of the lowest productivity ratings in the world. We're in the triple digit when it comes to productivity. How do elections become more efficient? Does INEC need to totally be dissolved and rebuilt for us to have effective, productive elections that don't stop the economy? Because the economy essentially has been on freeze for the last 6 months, and now we've even compounded that with these postponements.
Politics is the biggest business in Nigeria. Although we talk about the economy, but politics is the biggest business. There is hardly a properly defined private sector. This may shock a lot of people, but if you go to some countries, you could see the clear difference between government structures and those who are in the private sector. But in Nigeria, it's a bit blurry. Those who seem to prosper, in the private sector are prosperous because of some kind of linkage with government. And so government is the biggest business, And so when we are about to start a process of choosing leaders that will then populate governmental structures, is the business in town, is the biggest business. So when we get it wrong, the economy simply collapses.
So we're able to justify these postponements and these lack of productivity because actually everything revolves around.
Yes. So what we need to do if we want to move on a better trajectory is probably to make sure that we make politics seem like just a symbolic exercise of citizens choosing their leaders. But I don't know whether that is possible because the easiest way you can get rich in this country is to go into politics. Yes, is to go into politics. So what you might consider to be a routine exercise of people choosing leaders and going back home, it's not as routine as you might think.
Yeah, but you know, there's another part to it that we must be very aware of. Schools are closed because many times INEC is using schools for the elections.
Yes.
Okay? So that's why schools are closed. We need to understand this thing.
Some of them also because of security.
No, I'm coming to that. I want to go through the process
Okay.
of why
The
this
schools are closed.
this is happening. The schools are closed. Secondly, they use teachers and as part of the electoral team. So that's why, again, schools are closed. So we need to understand that part of it. All right? The other part is the security aspect of it, where a whole town shuts down. Because back in the old days, they were moving ballot boxes up and down. They were moving electoral materials back and down. So they wanted to put everybody on lockdown so that that movement won't happen. Again, I come back to technology. Technology can prevent that. And we could actually have, I mean, you know, in America, for example, I hate to go and use other countries, but I just want to mention this. You just walk in, election day, for starters, you can vote, depending on what state you are, you can vote before election day. Okay? Some states give you 1 week before election day. Some states will give you 1 month before election day. You can vote. So there's not this mass voting that's taking place. That's number one. Number two, it's very easy. You know where your vote is. You just walk in there. The people are there all day, and they give you a time frame within which to come to vote. There's none of this lining up, doing this. We all vote at a certain time, because technology bridges all that. Which I'm still coming back to some simple technology. I'm not talking about high-tech technology. I'm just saying simple technology that blocks all this out.
Funny enough, basically what the two of you are saying is the same thing in one way or the other, which is basically the biggest business in Nigeria is politics. So the fact that kids have lost 2 days of school, they're going to lose 2 more days of school, so that's 4 days of school, not counting all the other holidays. By the end of this year, our kids would have lost probably about 15 days of actually in-classroom instruction. So once again, when we say we have poor educational indices, when you look at global standards, these are the reasons why. Because every 4 years, the biggest business in town comes to town.
And everything else has to grind to a halt.
Yes, and maybe we should also ask, is it not, what is it about holding these elections on one big day? Why can't we stagger the elections? For instance, why don't we say, you know, this Saturday, prisoners are going to vote? Disabled people are going to vote. Elderly people are going to vote. No. I mean, that's what happens in other countries. I'm saying this because, you know, we need to completely rethink our structure. Why can't we say, look, disabled people, you know, are going to vote this weekend. Prisoners are going to vote. Elderly people are going to vote. You know, make elections a non-event. Why do we have to wait until we choose a particular day and then let the entire country be shut down simply because we want to hold elections? So I think we need to completely think about this.
I think that the staggered election.
Yeah, that's a huge issue.
Right, but I even think the opposite should be. I can't figure out why presidential and national are one day and governorship and House of Assembly on one day. Why can't we just have all one at the same time?
Well, that also
INEC
was
can
raised.
cope.
Yes.
INEC will obviously not be able to cope with the logistics.
Oh, there you go.
They've got a count. INEC printed 421 million ballot papers. Who is going to count all of those ballot papers?
Again,
This is the thing. It's so archaic.
Paper. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Really archaic.
We can really get rid of again, the point that has been made. We need to rethink everything. The point I keep making is that we're not thinking. We don't seem to think. Our time has no value to anybody. Our money has no value to anybody. It is, if you're interested, go and vote. I'm sending somebody else to go to vote.
I think in response to your question, we are caught in a vicious circle. Because it's bad governance breeds all this. It breeds inability to conduct our elections. It breeds the collapse of our educational system, the collapse of the judiciary. So it seeps through. It's like cancer. Bad governance is like cancer. So it affects every part of the nation. So we cannot, you know, expect the electoral process to suddenly be angelic, to suddenly be ideal. Because who are the people at the top? So so when they're not doing well, there are no plans, they don't think their way through anything. So then you just put somebody in INEC and they just go there, also not considering the implications of, look, if we don't get this right, it's going to cost our nation ₦1 trillion. So people don't really think in those terms. So it affects everything. So it's just like when people say, oh, the judiciary, the lawyers, the press, this. We come out of the same rotten society. And so you do not expect any sector to act differently.
Well, I must give I think change is coming. Because for the first time, I saw the chairman of a ruling party get upset at the conduct of the election by somebody they put in there. I mean, that was, to me, it was different. And he seemed genuinely upset. And he made some demands. I mean, it might be, like I said, he didn't go far enough by demanding for resignation. At that point, I would have stood up to applaud him, But at least that happened. And maybe for Nigeria, change is very slow. So, we'll see where we go. But I am thinking that this next 6 days, every day, I hope they hold a press conference today. Mm-hmm. This is what I have done. We need to baby them. They need to tell us what we have done. So maybe by Thursday, I will now have enough confidence to say, okay, let me go and buy a ticket again and come to Lagos and hopefully I can vote.
But the sad part of it is that they did tell us what they were doing throughout, daily assurances, and they mean nothing.
On Friday,
I saw that
the
video,
secretary was here assuring
the press secretary, yes, to the chairman of INEC. When the report of the postponement came out, INEC debunked it, only to confirm it hours later.
Right.
So what is the value of their assurances?
No,
and their guarantees?
that's why I'm saying I'm in a conundrum here. I don't know if I'm going to come back. I envy you guys in Lagos. I mean, you guys are going to get to vote. But it's so that's why we must make demands. That's why we must make demands. That, look, this is not acceptable. We should still demand his resignation. Because look, everybody is like, okay.
As you said, it's the Nigerian way to accept mediocrity.
Right.
So we have now 6 days. As you all know, there is so much information on WhatsApp, on social media. There, like you said earlier, it's acidic. Now we have 6 days. There's no campaigning. How do we keep this electorate engaged, interested, and also how do we manage the misinformation that is now going to take over the mobile airwaves?
So that's why I think, sorry.
If I could say something about this election cycle, I think it's the election cycle of fake news. Mm. That defines it for me, because all over social media, what you get is one fake story after the other, one photoshopped story after the other. And I think it behoves of INEC to take charge, especially as he said, of this next 6 days. Every day they need to come out to tell the people, just be transparent. If things, look, there is nothing wrong with things going wrong. It's human nature.
Right.
But tell people. Because if, I'm sure the outrage would not have been as much if it wasn't 5 hours before the election.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So my good friend would not have got on his plane, he would have rescheduled his flight.
Yes.
Yeah.
So many other people would have done the same thing. Because,
businesses would have still opened yesterday.
Yes, businesses, schools would not have been shut.
Yes.
So they need to be transparent and just be upfront and man up with us. This is what we're going through. This is how we intend to tackle it. And then when things are going wrong, you need to alert everybody. So that if it's logistics, the president knows, the governors knows, the Senate president, whoever knows. So they rally all the troops to say, look, these guys must not fail. We need to get this through. Mm-hmm. But if you don't say anything till the last minute, like you rightly said, you even deny it when they say, oh, it seems as if these elections are going to be postponed. You say, no, we're in good shape. And then 5 hours to the election time, you give us a very bad news.
And I think they missed an opportunity not to bring the political parties into the process of education. Even though they said that, so because the political parties can calm people down.
Yeah, they can.
Right? So they missed that opportunity because if they brought them into the process, the political parties can go back and say, no, don't worry, INEC called me today. They showed me their paperwork.
Yeah.
Everything is okay. Please go and vote for me.
Which is what happened in 2015.
Yeah.
Professor Jagger announced the postponement in the presence of the stakeholders, whereas Professor Mahmood announced the postponement and then addressed the stakeholders hours later at 2 p.m.
There has been
Upside down.
there has been a complete failure of communication coming from INEC. And one would expect, that in the 6 days before the election now, they need to have a communication command and control center. So say, look, this is what we are doing here, this is what we are doing now, this is what we are going to do tomorrow. Let there be complete crisis communication, complete, updating of INEC information every minute, because
Do you think they're capable of that?
I haven't seen that capacity demonstrated. They have a department of publicity and voter education, but we haven't seen a lot coming from that.
Can I also point
No, but
out something?
they have been active. That department has been active, talking about collection of PVCs, how not to have voided votes. So they should continue to be active. They have.
The only way you can assess their success, is to see whether the electoral process pans out well.
You see,
So far, it hasn't.
At the end of that process yesterday, the INEC chairman said something that shocked me. He said, please, we have to wrap up now because we have to go to the airport. And I'm wondering, what's he going to the airport for? He should be going to his office. Or is he going to the airport so that he himself, as INEC chairman, is physically going to inspect the amount of logistic equipment that is still at Abuja Airport? If that is what he was doing, that's a problem already. And it makes me very worried about his state of mind and the state of mind of the commission itself.
He also said that they're retrieving sensitive information that has been dispatched already, so that they're materials, thank you, so that they're not tampered with. Does that in any way
Give you some sense of...
confidence in the process?
So that's why he was going to the airport?
No, I'm not suggesting that, because he didn't say. But I'm just making that point.
Someone likened what has happened, to releasing examination questions to candidates. And then shifting the exams and then telling
the papers.
The integrity is already compromised. But I don't know whether in some indirect sense, if the failure, of INEC also, shines some light on the failure of infrastructure in this country. I would have thought that if we had speed trains, for instance, some of these things, if we had intercity, very efficient.
He said slow-moving vehicles that they had to use. He actually specified that they had to use slow-moving vehicles.
So you see. So these are the things, if you look at what has happened within the context of macro impacts on the system, you see that, there are points of, deficits, all across the country. If we have speed trains, for instance, you could have dedicated
So that feeds once again into the bigger, larger infrastructure issue we have.
Deficit, yes, because if we have speed trains, that could move from Lagos, to Ibadan under 10 minutes, or that could move from Kaduna to Kano under 15 minutes. Speed trains that you can find from, from Johannesburg Airport to Pretoria, less than 20 minutes. So if we had proper modern infrastructure, you'll be able to say, look, these are time-sensitive materials, so we have dedicated infrastructure to convey them. We don't have anything like that. Therefore, the onus becomes bigger on INEC to say, look, because of a deficit of proper and effective urban infrastructure, things we could do in 10 minutes, we probably ought to do a day before. It's all about planning. So if you now say that we want to do these things we couldn't do in 4 years, we want to do them in 6 days, you raise the kind of apprehensions Nigerians are expressing. Can this thing be fixed? I think we should look at the larger impact of what is going on and say, what can we fix? Unfortunately, we are not very good at doing those kind of post-mortem analysis in this country. Otherwise, we would have benefited from all the kind of situation reports and election monitoring reports, comprehensive reports. I am yet to find a single action taken on all these reports we've had since 1999, election monitoring and observation.
Well, let's investigate the other part of what he said. In a serious country, they would have nationalized for one day all transportation equipment. There are choppers sitting around in Lagos and Abuja doing nothing. They could have been nationalized and paid premium for their. They are looking for charter. I know during this political period, a lot of the aircraft operators were looking for charter to carry politicians up and down. The government could have chartered all those planes and paid them to distribute this material.
But the INEC chairman claims that the planes could not fly because of bad weather. Over the past week, they've observed this bad weather.
There's no. I came from Abuja. I flew from Abuja in here. There's no bad weather. Helicopters can land better than planes. Maybe planes need runways. But again, the point I'm trying to make, I'm not trying to...
It doesn't feel basically...
I don't think that in 2019, any serious country can cite bad weather.
But he did. And he said he noticed it. And he said he noticed it a week before. So then why not act on it a week before?
Sitting in your house, you don't need to be a meteorologist, but just sitting in your house and watching CNN, you can know where the weather in Athens will be like in the next 1 week or 2 weeks. And then you plan ahead. You can't in 2019 be blaming the weather.
Except
because
he
the
did.
The weather is going to...
Except that he did. He stood there and he said that.
Yeah, but if you've had 4 years effectively to plan for these things, you can't say, well, because the weather was bad in 1 week.
But I have to say, during the Q&A, there was no one that took him to task on the weather comment.
And not even a sudden deterioration in the weather, not even some kind of sudden typhoon that came out of left field. He said the previous week there had been bad weather conditions.
And there was no expansion on locations of those
bad weather conditions.
Yeah. Okay, so bad weather, I presume, would affect flights, okay? But what about ground transport? And that's the point I'm making. So if you purportedly saw this coming for 1 whole week, that would suggest to me logistically that you will provide alternatives.
There must have been a contingency plan you activate. Yes.
And we didn't see that. I think we can have a complete review of the system after the entire elections have held. And I hope that we'll be able to say, okay, this is what we have learned and this is how we are going to get it better. It's not when we wait until 2023. We say, well, we are postponing because the election was also postponed in 2019. We need to make sure we look more towards good precedent rather than bad precedent.
As always, it's good to have you here, Dr. Tam-George. You've been with us throughout this process. I also want to say thank you to both of you for being here. We hope you come back next week to vote, and we hope you come back. We hope you come back and you come and tell us about your experience voting. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.